Hello, this is Nick Yonker. I'm the Smoke Management Meteorologist for the Department of Forestry, the Smoke Management Program Manager. I'll be providing this remote briefing to you about the Smoke Management Plan update that we completed in 2019, and it has already started implementation. So before we start with the Smoke Management Plan changes, I do want to go over a little bit of a review of federal and state regulations, give you a little bit of a history, a walkthrough history, if you will, on how we got where we are today. So we'll start off in the very beginning with the Clean Air Act being initiated or instituted in 1963. In 1970, EPA was formed and they vested authority to implement the Clean Air Act. In 1972, the Voluntary Smoke Management Plan became regulatory through the newly formed Department of Environmental Quality, who were the implementers of the state implementation plan for the EPA Clean Air Act. So when we have DEQ with us, they are in authority for the Clean Air Act, and then they delegate to the Department of Forestry the prescribed burning program and the control of that program. However, whenever we want to make changes to that program, both DEQ and the Department of Forestry have to be on board together with all changes. Otherwise, we don't complete those changes, or we complete what we can and don't implement other changes. Further down the road, the Regional Haze Rule came into effect in 2009, also part of the state implementation plan. And now here we are today at 2019. But how did we get here from 1972 to 2019? We essentially had 7 revisions to the smoke management plan, of which 6 of those revisions, the first 6, were basically increasing air quality regulation on the program. Except for now, the 7th revision of the program, there was a change, and we had a change in our state policy, and that's what I'll be talking about with the new smoke management plan changes. So starting off with the first slide, where we've just had implementation starting March 1st, there were 2 main changes to the smoke management plan that were important or necessitated by the fact of what was going on the ground in the western states was the increase in wildfire. And that increase in wildfire was basically due to the increased and prolific amount of fuel that had been on the ground and had not burned. We had done such an effective job of suppression of wildfire that now we had a great fuel buildup, and now we've realized that we need to do more to reduce that fuel in a more controlled means. So we've had the smoke management program since 1972, but mainly it's been focused on air quality interests. We try to prevent smoke from getting into what's called smoke sensitive receptor areas, or SSRAs. And now we're looking at the fact that we need to increase the amount of prescribed burning smoke. So whereas before we would prevent smoke from getting into smoke sensitive receptor areas, now we're going to allow a certain amount. And that's what this slide shows, that we are going to go from a smoke intrusion that is any smoke at ground level to where a smoke intrusion is particulate matter 2.5, averages at 26 micrograms per cubic meter over a 24-hour period from midnight to midnight, and a 1-hour threshold of PM 2.5 averaging at or above 70 micrograms per cubic meter over a 1-hour period. And this matches in line with EPA's Clean Air Act basically implementation plan for the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. So to give you a little perspective on what the 1-hour threshold is, since that is as an hourly threshold on how much smoke is in the air, if we were to take a situation where we had a relatively good air quality, so we could say we see 50 miles, we could see the mountains in the distance and so forth. If we were to put smoke into an SSRA, that had that type of visibility, and it would reduce the visibility down to about 5 miles. That would be about equivalent to a 70 microgram per cubic meter hit, which would be at the threshold of a smoke intrusion. Typically at 5 miles, that's not too bad of air quality, but it is obviously degraded over the 50 miles. So what we would be seeing, we would lose those mountains in the distance, and we'd probably see maybe the hills nearby, and we'd smell some smoke. But generally, we wouldn't have too much of a problem with being able to breathe that. We would notice it was there, we would see it, we would smell it, and so forth. Some people who are sensitive may have some issues with it, but this is the first level of which the short term at 70 micrograms is where would be one way in which we would have a smoke intrusion. If we averaged those values over a 24-hour period from midnight to midnight, and it got to be above 26 micrograms, then that totality throughout the 24-hour period would also serve as a smoke intrusion. So you can get a smoke intrusion either or, the 24-hour threshold or the 1-hour threshold. So this changes what we've had in the past, where we'd measure smoke intrusions by intensity, which is also a short-term average, but was known as more a nuisance-based standard. So we would have light, moderate, or heavy intrusions, and this had nothing to do with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Now we are tying our smoke intrusions to the NAAQS, as it's called, because the NAAQS exceedance is at 35 micrograms per cubic meter over a 24-hour period from midnight to midnight. So what that means is our 26 microgram intrusion for the 24-hour period is there's a buffer between the 26 and 35. In other words, 26 is 75% of the NAAQS. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to provide a buffer that when we do have a smoke intrusion, that we don't go over the NAAQS, because if we do go over the NAAQS for a community, especially an SSRA, we only get so many chances before or so many times in which we can exceed those NAAQS standards over a 3-year period, that if we go over that, we would then have what's called a National Ambient Air Quality violation, and that would put the community into a non-attainment status, and that would require a lot of action on the community to get back out of that non-attainment status. So we do not want to go there, and so that's why we do have a buffer at 26 micrograms, and we have another one at the 1-hour threshold of 70 micrograms. In addition to allowing for a little bit more smoke into the communities, but below the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, we are concerned with a health-based threshold and not the nuisance-based threshold. So in the past, we would have our intrusion based off of how much we increased the particulate from a prior background level, or an average, or a 3-hour average background level. So we didn't concern ourselves with how polluted the air was prior to our smoke getting into the SSRA. We were only concerned with how much we bumped it up, and that would determine whether we had a light, moderate, or heavy intrusion. Now, as a health-based standard, we are concerned with other people's smoke. So there could be backyard burning, there could be wood stove burning, field burning, and so forth, in addition to the smoke from our prescribed burning. So what this means is that if the air quality is good, the smoke we put into a community could be a greater amount because we have a lower background level to even start with. So if we had 5 micrograms at the background level, then we'd raise it 21, then that would reach us to get us to the intrusion level of 26 micrograms. However, if the background is significantly polluted by other sources, like it was at 15 or 20 micrograms, that would only give us somewhere between 6 and 11 micrograms to work with that we could add to that air quality the existing air quality that we have. Again, that's a health-based standard. In other words, we're considering all sources because our lungs don't distinguish between whether it's forestry burning, field burning, backyard burning, or whatever. So we are concerned with the totality of all particulate. So if we are part of the problem, then we would have to take the intrusion hit for us because we put enough smoke into an already polluted background to make for the particulate that reached the intrusion level. So thus, what it means is, the next bullet, areas with pre-existing high levels of particulate may see more smoke restrictions. Finally, ground level smoke into any sensitive area that does not meet the smoke intrusion criteria will be defined as a smoke incident. So if you do get smoke into a community, whether it's an SSRA or not, it would be an incident if it doesn't reach intrusion criteria. So that's another criteria that we're using in how we determine smoke impacts. In addition, policy changes that are in our rule or have been updated in our rule, smoke management plan replaces prevent smoke from entering into SSRAs to minimize smoke emissions. So we make allowance for having some smoke get into a community as long as it does not exceed the NAAQS rule. In addition, our reporting requirements change a little bit. In the past, smoke intrusions, if it was any smoke that got into a community, it was a smoke intrusion, so we'd always have to do an intrusion report. Now, with a smoke impact at the smoke incident level, we just have to be just logging a few items on an internal report here in our smoke management section, but we don't have to broadcast that out to the rest of the world or the rest of our stakeholders. If it's a smoke intrusion, if we do reach that 26 or that 70 micrograms at the 1 hour, then we would have to do an intrusion report like we've done in the past. Our smoke intrusion reports have also been streamlined, so they're a little bit easier to do as well. But the incident only gets a quick review, whereas a smoke intrusion will be more thorough. Lastly, there will be another smoke intrusion that exceeds the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, or NAAQS. If this occurs, then that will necessitate some management actions to change basically the amount of smoke that can be produced and cause an intrusion, because now we've exceeded a NAAQS exceedance of a community, and that's 1. So we get 4 of those in a 3-year period. That's going to put a community into non-attainment, and we do not want to do that. We do not want to get a community where it's going to have to work to get its way out of it, which will also mean reduced amount of smoke from prescribed burning. So in this case, we would have a situation where the Oregon Department of Forestry Smoke Management Section, along with Department of Environmental Quality and the burner, would have a discussion on how to prevent this NAAQS exceedance from occurring again. And however that comes about will determine for that area how much smoke or how much burning can be done, because now you've exceeded the NAAQS, and we don't want to continue doing that until we get a violation of the standard. The second key change of the smoke management plan is communication. This is something we have not done significantly in the past. We will be doing so in the future, because now we're allowing for a greater amount of smoke to go into a community. We're still trying to keep the air quality clean, but we're allowing for a little more smoke to get into a community without it causing an exceedance or an intrusion. We need to communicate better throughout the state of Oregon, as well as varying communities, on why we're doing what we're doing. The first thing that we're going to do is have a statewide communication plan or framework that's going to be developed by ODF. It's in the process right now. And this is going to go out to key stakeholders. It will also go out to media. And there'll be 5 key messages it's going to talk about: why we burn, what the health effects of prescribed smoke or wildfire smoke is, how to mitigate smoke from prescribed burning or wildfire. So what action can an individual take to get away from the smoke or reduce its impact, notification of where we're doing burning, and notification of a prescribed burn that could put smoke into a specific SSRA. So that's 5 key factors that will be in the communication plan, and this will go out throughout statewide. In addition, we do have certain smoke vulnerable SSRAs in the state that have had smoke intrusions in the past and are near forested areas and will likely have smoke incidents or intrusions in the future, that we want to encourage those communities to develop what's called community response plans. It will be similar to the statewide communication plan, but it will focus on that individual SSRA. So what it'll look like is that you'll have the community, the health department get together with forestry and others to discuss how we would notify the community of smoke getting in from prescribed burning, where the burning's taking place so they know about it, and what they can do to protect themselves for just that individual community. We're looking at 20 different SSRAs over the next 2 years for developing these community response plans. So again, they are voluntary, but we are highly encouraging them. And it will take a while for all these communities to consider having a community response plan. Also, in the new rule, we'll add, or we have added, a vulnerable population definition. Vulnerable populations are citizens who are either very young, basically 2 years and younger, or 65 and older, those who have cardiopulmonary function problems, COPD, asthma, and other things like that. Those are the most sensitive folks. We want to make sure especially those folks are notified of potential smoke getting into the community so that they can take appropriate action. Mainly for this program is for prescribed burning, but we also like to see a program for wildfire to do the same thing. And finally, the exemption process from an hourly intrusion threshold can be requested by communities that have an approved community response plan. So the first thing to do is to have that SSRA have a community response plan, and if they want to get an exemption, they will have to go through their city council and their county commissioners to get that response plan approved, and then it will go to DEQ, ODF, and Oregon Health Authority to get a final approval. And if that's the case, then they don't have to concern themselves with an intrusion at the hourly intrusion threshold, but only the 24-hour threshold. So that's another change if people need that. The Bend area has been one noted place that is seeking an exemption from that hourly intrusion threshold. A few other things that have changed, not the 2 key factors that I've mentioned in the past. The use of polyethylene covers on piles as an emission reduction technique has been changed, so there are no restrictions on size, thickness, or coverage. This is based on a study that we did in 2015 that basically showed that it doesn't matter how much polyethylene you put on a pile, which is basically a thin black plastic that is not a highly toxic material like hard plastic, but is no more toxic than the woody material you're burning as it is that's underneath. But we found from this study that really we do not need restrictions on size or thickness or coverage. It's expensive enough as it is, so landowners will not want to use too much of it, but we've made this change to allow more freedom to use polyethylene covers to keep emissions small when they're burned with the covers, to keep when the piles are drier, they will burn fewer emissions than they would if they were wet. We've added an additional example for alternatives to burning to basically remove or minimize large fuel concentrations that could smolder. We've updated some web links and had a few other minor edits. And finally, we've moved special protection zone requirements from the directive to the rule, and we've updated the maps for SPZs for Oak Ridge, Klamath Falls, and Lakeview based off of topography. It's kind of like an airshed. So if smoke is trapped in the valleys that lead to these areas, then we would, under certain conditions during the wintertime, prevent any wood stove, prevent any prescribed burning smoke from occurring in that SPZ area. This is because the areas that we're talking about are areas that have either been in non-attainment or could possibly go into non-attainment. So that's why these special protection zones are in place, and they're only in place during the late fall and early winter months between November 15th to February 15th. In addition, we've added a new rule, a new rule adding contingency plan requirements for SPZs that have or currently exceed the NAAQS. So implementation, which is started as of March 1st. Already we've had implementation for the polyethylene change in size and thickness requirements. Smoke incidents have been reported on an internal log already. Smoke intrusions, so we've had 2 of them so far this year in Bend and Baker City, and they've already gone out, and we have not had any NAAQS exceedances, but that's also in place. And also we are cautiously implementing the new intrusion definition so we don't put too much smoke into communities and get them unhappy with a change in the smoke before we get community response plans in place. Future implementation, prescribed burn instructions will be updated to consider polyethylene use and the change in intrusion definition. We're expecting that the new burn instructions will be in place for fall burning. We just haven't had the capacity to get this in place for the past spring burning. In addition, the communication plan is in draft form right now. We expect later this summer to the fall, we will implement that and essentially send that out to stakeholders and throughout all the media and throughout the state. So that'll be probably this fall. And community response plans, we are working on those as well. We have 11 initially that we will start for 2019, although we will probably start with 1 or 2 specifically to develop a template on how to do this. So that will take a little bit longer. We expect probably the community response plans that could take 1 to 2 years to complete for all the communities we're looking for. And exemption requests, again, is part of the community response plan. So without a community response plan to approve, we can't do exemption requests yet. So until we get a community response plan that we can approve, the exemption request does not apply at this point. So finally, just to conclude, just some potential challenges, some potential benefits. On the challenges side, poor air quality may lead to increased burn restrictions. As I've mentioned before, the more smoke you already have in the atmosphere before you do your prescribed burning, that could lead to more burn restrictions. The NAAQS exceedances will have management actions to prevent future occurrences. So we don't want to go too high on getting a NAAQS exceedance. We want to stay at no higher than the smoke intrusion level. Smoke incidents that reach intrusion levels could lead to additional SSRAs. Another part of our rule that's been in place is that if a community wants to be an SSRA and they get smoke incidences that reach the intrusion level, they can apply for an SSRA status. They have to go through a process, but they could ask to be an additional SSRA. That means another area in which we need to protect at least at a certain level. Potential benefits include cover piles will allow for more burning near SSRAs. So this is typically where covering piles to keep dry is a good place to do it, is very close to SSRAs, because the more they're covered, the drier they are, the less emissions they'll produce, and with fewer emissions, less likely to get into an SSRA. Increased burn opportunities based on less restrictive intrusion definition. As mentioned, we've changed to a health-based standard so we can get some smoke into an SSRA, and so that will allow for greater burn opportunities. And finally, the communication plan and response plan should help improve a social license to burn. If people know why we're burning, what they can do to protect themselves, then we feel that the community will feel like they've been included into the process in prescribed burning and the importance of that and how they can protect themselves. That concludes my briefing. Are there any questions? If you do have questions, you can email me at nick.j.yonker@oregon.gov or reach me by my phone, which is 503-945-7451. Thank you very much.